Hey, Guru Nation, welcome back to another episode of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. This one is special. This one is one that I've wanted to do for a while. And just serendipitously, I was on Twitter because Twitter actually consumes way too much of my time. Uh, as a creator, I'm supposed to just get in and get out, but Twitter always sucks me in with different threads. And our guest today is from one of these threads, Paul Agapau. So Paul is a biomedical and epi-informatic. He's a data science leader, solving complex cross-disciplinary problems. Joining us from Camden Town, England, United Kingdom. Good evening over there,
Good
Paul.
evening, Dan, and well done on pronouncing my last name correctly. Though I'm sure you have more or less the same issues, right?
I definitely do. I mean, one of my strengths is actually pronouncing people's last names generally correctly, like compared to the average person. That's this one is something I'm proud of. So yours is easy, Paul.
It is. I always tell people it's pronounced exactly the way it's written, and they always make it more complicated than it should be.
Nope, nope. So Paul's LinkedIn profile is underneath the video, and if you're listening on the podcast, first of all, thank you. Second of all, go connect with Paul right now. His LinkedIn profile is in the show notes. So Paul's got an interesting background because as you've as you've clicked on the title, this is going to be about maybe pros and cons of academia versus private industry, going in depth with someone who's done both. Okay, Paul
Mhm.
made a thread on Twitter, like I said, about moving from academia to industry, the good, the bad, not intended to be an argument. But if you're wondering about the jump, which Paul, I know a lot of people are, and by the way, that thread must have gone viral, right? That like you've probably got a bunch of people reaching out to you.
I have. I'm experiencing what it's like to be internet famous, and trying to avoid, I don't want to become a scientific influencer, right?
Well,
But
I think that we are in an era where that's definitely a possibility.
that's right. Me and the Cardassians, absolutely. Except I'm in clinical trials. Yeah, it was
Will
strange
Smith
to go.
taking away a little bit of your
Oh
shine
yeah,
last night. He's hogging a little bit of the news this morning.
damn him, damn him.
So, Paul, you went from academia to GSK, right? GlaxoSmithKline. Is that
Well, yeah, well, actually, there's a couple of steps in between, but the long story of my life is that originally, once upon a time, I was an immunologist, but as business changes, of course, and you get more and more into the information and the computer sides of things. I got sort of sucked off course there, and ended up going through jobs with this, lots of different job titles in there: bioinformatician, computer guy in inverted commas, you know, um, things like that, and spent a long time in the university, various universities. Did some government work as well along the way and worked in some research institutions. But some years ago, one of the big farmers came along and headhunted me, and so I made the leap because I thought, well, let's try this out. Let's see where this is going, right? And it's been happy days ever since, I have to say. So I'm at GlaxoSmithKline currently. I was previously working at AstraZeneca, although I have to say, because I work for Big Pharma, that nothing I say here represents their opinions or is official company policy, etc., etc.
of course not. They don't know their own opinions on things. So how would you
That's
know,
true.
Paul? um,
Exactly.
so what made the headhunter, when you were at academia at the university there, the university was the which one was it again?
Imperial
Imperial
College
College.
London.
So what made the headhunter find you and say, "Hey, we want you to join us in
You know,
private industry"?
Hmm. I think there was something in the air at that time because it started happening all at once, getting calls from all sorts of places, and pharma getting interested. So I think it wasn't me radically becoming a somewhat more interesting person. I think what we're seeing is that this area, biotechnology, information technology, the clinical science and research and so forth, has just become hotter and hotter as the years have gone by, and there it has become more of an industry rather than a niche, if you want to. And that was that transition that happened, about 5 years ago or so. And people have also started to they've been more open to moving around as well, and become more self-determined. There's been less of this, you know, you've moved into a career and you stay there because this is the niche that you know. And the pandemic has only amplified that tendency.
Absolutely. So basically, your data science and your biomedical background, you were able to transition. Well, you were attractive to private industry
Yeah.
sponsors like AstraZeneca in your ability to design clinical trials, to design the protocols, endpoint analysis, patient
Hmm.
selection, all those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
Do you think the academia helped you hone those skills?
Absolutely. Look, I we had this little talk before the show that I'm not entirely down on my academic experience, and I don't look upon it as wasted time. There were a lot of opportunities there to pick up the right sort of skills there, things that would be very useful for me later on down the road. Or that was not the intention at the time. We were just the shall we say the kind of the fluidity or lack of structure in academia kind of let us go into a lot of things, and accidentally almost kind of make ourselves valuable assets for big companies.
Wait, so you said the lack of structure in academia? Because I would have guessed it's the complete opposite.
Well, I think, and this kind of one of the big selling points about academia is that they will always say you can work on whatever you want, or you can have academic freedom, and so forth. And I think the flip side of that is that very often in a big company you'll have people to sort your papers, do your admin, do your HR, things like that. But in the university, you have to do a lot of that work yourself. You have to set up your computers, you have to kind of like do your own analytics, so forth. You become a bit of a jack of all trades, or you
Mm.
can become one. And that's not an entirely good thing, but it can be used to get yourself useful skills in these circumstances. And that's the way that it worked out for me.
So a lot of people watching this show or listening to this podcast, many have PhDs, but most don't. The majority are bachelors of science, masters of science, clinical research coordinators. They want to be clinical research associates. And I get
Hmm.
a lot of these questions. Hey, I've been stuck at this academic medical center for the last 5 years. I feel like I've reached the peak of how far I can advance, but
Hmm.
nobody in private industry wants me. Like I can't even get interviews. So what do I do? And my advice has always been try to get out as quickly as, as you can. But I don't know if that's good advice.
Well, I think that's not bad advice, Dan. I think it's someone said to me actually said that it's a lot easier. Companies are a lot more amenable to recruiting people at the beginning of their careers and at the end of their careers. At the beginning of their careers, you're fresh out, you got a lot of knowledge there. At the end of your careers, they're recruiting you for your experience, your prestige, or so forth. So if you're one of those people in the middle that can get a bit sticky, I wouldn't say to give up hope, but just know that you're going to have to work around perhaps people's prejudices. So yeah, I would absolutely. I think if you've been in an academic center and you're not moving ahead, it can be a fatal mistake to think, "I'll hang in there." and eventually they'll recognize that I'm a great person, or that, I'm valuable. You're more likely to be seen as valuable by someone outside, I think.
That is the mindset, right? I think I see
Mm,
that here in the United States. It seems like it's the same thing over there in the UK. It's, hey, you
yeah,
know what? If I just keep at it, eventually someone will recognize me and maybe
yeah.
I'll get to be a director. And you're
Mhm.
saying that's not what is the
No,
norm.
yeah, I not at all. I think, look, you'll move faster by moving around. Even if maybe it's not going to another institution or company, but maybe moving within
Mm,
one company might work for you. Someone once said to me that your typical career is not like an ever ascending line. It's more like a spiral. So if you like, you're kind of shifting sideways and up, and shift sideways and up, and shift sideways and up, and you'll ascend a lot faster that way, I think.
mm.
Whereas if you stay in one place, perhaps there's a bit of psychology that people think that, this is what this person does, and they're not confident that you can do anything else.
Exactly that. I've had a many, but the one s- that resonated with me the most, I had about a half an hour conversation with a hiring manager at a big
Mhm.
CRO. I'm not going to say which one, but there's only like five of them. So and they're all the same basically.
Yeah.
She said, when we look for CRAs to hire, we look at coordinators and we look at CRAs from other companies. However, if there is a CRC, a coordinator from an
Mhm.
academic medical center, I run away, is what she said. And that resonated with me. And I've heard similar things from others. That resonated with me. So that turned into my advice for the viewers. And I've been
Yeah.
getting a lot of hate from people at AMCs saying, hey, why, this unfounded hate? And I'm sure there's
Mm.
some AMCs that are great, but I'm giving you guys like interpretation of what people have actually told me. So this is why I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Yeah. No, look, I'm fully on board with you. It's not that you that think that AMCs and everything like that are terrible, and the people that work there are less skilled or anything. There is just this perception that sometimes in the academic context, people can be a bit institutionalized, and fair or unfair, you're going to have to deal with this when you're out on the job market. So people can refer to my Twitter thread or whatever for my advice, but I think just you know be ready for that challenge when you're interviewing. They'll come to you and say, do you think you can really work in industry? And, how do you think it's different? Show that you've thought about that. Show that you're an organized person who understands deadlines, who understands milestones and pressure and juggling different work streams, and you'll be able to diffuse that challenge in there. But it's not that AMCs and the universities and so forth are substandard. There is just this perception by a lot of hirers. So
Mhm.
fair or not, you've got to get around it.
So what is the perception? Like what is, if you had to point to, like, let's say three things that the private industry is hesitant about when it comes to a candidate from an AMC?
All right. Okay. So let's go for that. Number one, that they're disorganized. Okay. We know kind of sometimes and honestly in many hospitals, but let's say AMCs or so forth, that there is this whiff of the university about them, and it's all slightly shambolic and running from disaster to disaster. And, you know, they don't want this to be their practice. They want people who are organized and disciplined and so forth. So, the fact that you can have a schedule and execute on it would be that first one. Uh, then there would be, I think, perhaps slightly in the university context, there's this sometimes people get hooked into things that are interesting but not necessarily valuable, shall we
Mm,
say.
mhm.
There's if you're working with clinical scientists and so forth, chasing that kind of interesting tidbit of something that could be going on. But a crow wants to execute a trial. Okay, so if you can be clear about what your mission is and executing on it and not getting distracted, then you'll be gold for them. And would I put a third point in there? I think maybe if you just show an appreciation for, what is the business here? What are we trying to achieve? And being able to work with people in a team to achieve that, because we have all worked, of course, with difficult people in our lives, and they are everywhere. But many people within an academic context will you know, perhaps not appreciate that, this is a team sport we're in, right? You know, we work together, and we show that we're good colleagues and we work well with others. So those would be my three.
Those are actually good 3. So, no number 2 is basically sticks out to me like, maybe try to be, especially if you higher level, like PhD, and you're trying to
Yeah.
transition just like you were, maybe try to be a little less intellectual and a little more pragmatic about your activities
I
or
Yeah, no, I think so. I think we see a lot of, let's call them academic CVs, and they're academic as and they're formatted and they're pitched in an academic way. Look at these papers that are on, look at these software that I used, look at kind of the traditional markers of what you'd call an academic career. And, you know, you're undercutting yourself there. I think you're much better if you show that, like, here I am, here's what I did, here is the problem we had, here is how I solved it. You know, that sort of thing.
so why, and you're not speaking for any of the sponsors that you work for or have worked for, but why is it that they're hesitant to hire people from academia, but when it comes to needing a site, they go to the KOLs, key opinion leaders that are at these academic medical centers? I mean, they like
Well,
one
I've
part about it, but not the rest, right?
well, I don't know. Maybe I'm really not sure. Maybe it's a bit of a, the different things that sort of an academic medical center could provide for you. Credibility on one side. You go to Sloan Kettering or whatever in there, but on the other hand, when you're looking at someone's CV and they've come from an academic place, you'll sort of say, well, all these scientific papers are fine, good for you, but actually, what we want is, you know, almost they're more interested in recruiting a type of person rather than a person who has used this software,
Mm.
and a person who has X publications and so forth. I mean, I know that I myself would tend to recruit someone who's more adaptable, who's a good colleague, who I'd be happy to work with, rather than someone who is a bona fide genius, right?
So you on the Twitter thread, and this is where I
Mhm.
like to, I always recommend, hey, the smaller the company you could work for, the better initially because
Mm.
you're gonna grow the quickest, right? And that'll kind
Yeah.
of help your career trajectory a lot, I think. And then you can go more step ladder with the bigger companies if you want. It's not for everybody. You said companies, especially small ones, will have priorities and interests, but they are often more flexible than you expect. Your hurdle is to link the project to the company mission and the bottom line. And they still might say no. Do you think that somebody from an AMC is better suited to work at a smaller biotech, let's say, or do you think they're better off at like a Pfizer or a Johnson and Johnson?
Mhm. Well, that is interesting. I think you absolutely, if you're coming from academia, maybe if you go into the right sort of small biotech startup, you could find it like transparently the same sort of work. in a sense. You've got a problem to solve, you're barreled into it.
Mm,
It's up to you to solve things. You've got a fairly small group of people, so you have to be a bit flexible about stuff. And there is greater ownership of your problem, as it
yeah.
were, in a small company. Whereas, maybe in a larger one, that wouldn't be there. But yeah, it might be an easier step. You're quite right, going a smaller one. But as as said, one of the great, you know, promises people say about academia is, you could work on whatever you wanted to, or so forth. And, people say if you go into industry, if you go into a startup or something like that, you're not going to get that. And well, actually, I think in many cases there's be a lot more flexibility than I think you would imagine. There
Mm,
would be the scope to actually work on a lot of different things in a better resourced way than actually would have been possible in the university. But you have to appreciate that you're in a business there. So what's in it for them?
mhm. And the prestige, is there, I mean, I'm trying to rationalize, okay, how would a biotech care about recruiting this person? Let's say you worked at a prestigious AMC.
Hmm.
I think it's, to me it's logical. I don't know if this is correct, but to me it's logical. The smaller the company, the more they actually care about that prestige because they're trying to attract investors or whatever the case may be, as opposed to like AstraZeneca, who doesn't need any more prestige. They are the prestige.
Yes, I think you're right, Dan. I think smaller companies will care more about that particular thing. They'll care more about that kind of marker of this is a good person in there because a small company exists in an attention economy, right?
Hmm.
You know, it relies on getting eyes on and sort of approval from the world for its very survival. Whereas in a big company is going to more kind of think, "Eh, well, does this person have what we need for our more strategic vision? Are we happy to hire this person? And as things change, they'll hang around and they'll be useful for us. And, they can grow with us. And different people will like different environments better. I wouldn't fault that. But yeah, I think you've got a good rule of thumb there.
Back to your Twitter thread. This is a great thread. I mean, it's like a book. It's, how long did it take you to write this thing?
Oh God! Well, I'm going to confess. I kind of had the idea sort of a long time before, and so I'd been jotting down ideas and like a OneNote off to the side, about points that I would make, and then one day you know what Twitter has become like. It's become a bit fractious and
Oh,
a bit
yeah,
of a hostile place at times, hasn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
it has.
That's what draws me in. People like looking at the accident on the side of the road. This
Yeah,
is
it
that's
is,
essentially what
isn't it?
Twitter is.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought, hey, I'm going to put some positive out there, and so that's why I said, I'm not trying to talk you into leaving the university or academia, but if you were, here are some things that might help you. And so in the end, I think taking from my copied stuff, it wasn't that bad. It was over like postings over 3 hours on one day and then 2 hours the next day to
Wow.
add in. Yeah.
See, this is what makes Twitter. This is why Twitter is still so great, because of threads like this. One of the threads, or one of the tweets,
Mm.
suspicion of academics. Industry interviewers often grill candidates on the differences between academia and industry and if they'll be able to cope. It's a well
Mm.
motivated fear with a history of ex academics being disorganized, which you discussed, dismissive
Mm.
of business needs, which you've discussed, and difficult to work with, which you haven't discussed. So,
I haven't.
what is with this? Because I'm trying to understand, like, why the hesitation. I've never been in that
Mm.
AMC world. The closest I've got was monitoring a site, and I can tell you my experience monitoring that site was pretty bad. My biggest
Well,
complaint was they had, when I monitor at a small private site, there's one person, there's the coordinator, and there's the PI, and
yeah.
they're both responsible for the study. At an AMC, you have like 15 people. And each time you need
Mm,
something, you go to one, and that one says, "No, that's not my responsibility. Go to this person." Then you go to that person, they say, "No, no, go back to that person." So you're just trying to find out who's responsible. At the end of the day, seems like nobody is responsible. And when you approach the PI says, "Well, we do what we can. Sponsor still loves us because we're prestigious and blah blah blah."
uh,
So go figure it
no,
out.
yeah, no, I think, I think there is that tendency there that, you do find these kind of somewhat chaotic academic environments for a lot of reasons. There's this constant kind of precarity in there, kind of a Red Queen's race. We got to keep kind of climbing us up, or else we'll be left behind. So slight suspicion between people. You've got a constant flux of people kind of move, students and, postdoctoral fellows and so forth come in and go, all of whom kind of have their own objectives as well, right? To move on. And I feel that, when you move to some of these bigger companies or as I said, these other sites, that lack of precarity really shows. People are there because, well, they just want to do their job. And at the end of the day, it hits 5 o'clock, they'll close the books and they'll go home. And they're a lot calmer to deal with. um, so I do feel there's something in those environments that does lead to chaos with dealing them, and people's personalities, shall we say, kind of the bad aspects of their personalities are more likely to be
Mm,
lifted up and highlighted in there.
yeah. One of the things I noticed, and then we'll switch to being a generalist versus a specialist because you wrote about that as well. There's not, I don't think there's a aspect of this topic you haven't discussed in your Twitter thread, but we can go more in depth. I do want to get to
Sure.
generalist versus specialist because I always talk about that. But when it comes to the AMCs, okay, one of the things I've noticed at the private companies, there's incentive
Mhm.
structures, right? You have incentive
Uh,
even at this my own sites that I own. We give our coordinators incentives. Hey, if you can screen or randomize X number of patients, you get a bonus at the end of the year. In academic medical center, that's frowned upon. You can't do that. But it's not
yeah.
like they don't have the money. The money's just going somewhere else. It's not going to the people doing the work. So there's no incentives for them. So what is the real incentive for the employee at a AMC other than trying to attract the attention of their supervisors who you say, that's basically exercise in futility. They're never going to attract the attention, or at least they might attract the attention, but there's no outcomes. It's wishful thinking to have maybe some kind of positive outcome for their career. So why do people stick around in these places?
I mean, let me just dodge back to incentives for a moment, but I
Mm,
think you've hit upon something quite interesting there. In a different context, I've given a couple of talks at conferences about AI and machine learning and biomedicine. And one of the problems there, I think, is that everyone has different incentives. The doctor wants to use it to kind of to cure their patient. The drug company kind of wants to kind of pipeline something to sort of help them sell drugs. The university professor kind of wants to get a couple of papers and things like that out there. And all of these things do not quite overlap. And I think what we have here is kind of the same thing. Some of your smaller centers, I think, you might disagree, but I feel maybe you've connected into people who are just like, well, great, this is a trial. We can try something out for our patients and we'll be doing good and our patients will benefit. And you're going into an AMC and you're getting into an environment where there are all these other incentives, kind of prestige and climbing the academic ladder and, oh my God, just keeping my job here and so forth. And I think there can be a certain tunnel vision in these places. where people have a single idea of the career that they could have, that they're headed towards, and so they very much kind of lock target on that and don't look outside at the possibilities for themselves. Don't look at, maybe the world has changed and there are other things out there for them.
Mm,
You can do very similar work in other places. So, and I think actually, so the academic environment's very good at doing that. Actually, at assuming implicitly a type of career for their people, that you will stay here and you'll progress up the ladder, or you'll go on to certain positions. Where, of course, in industry, they're founded upon the idea that people are moving around.
mhm,
They bounce from company to company. They assume that you're going to uh, trade up and along, and they're fundamentally different ways of looking at the world.
mhm, mhm. Um, I think the AMC's recognize this at some level because there's been an increase in private-public partnerships. Certainly before COVID, I was actually part of it. I got I was asked to do an RFP for an AMC, and I think they just stole the idea to do it themselves, but that's another topic. But they recognize, the inefficiencies on some level, so they were able to utilize, or they were trying to utilize their prestige, but
Mm.
to attract leads, but then to be able to execute them, they would kind of partner with smaller clinics like mine. So I think
Uh,
I saw that trend before COVID. I don't know after COVID. I assume it's going to continue. But
mm.
they recognize most of what you're saying as well. I'm just curious, did anyone reach out to you from AMC's, and what was their outlook on what you had to say?
I've had quite a few sort of people contacting me in the background, and yes, tragically, I think I'm now forming a second career as like a career agony aunt for ex academics. You know, uh,
There's a
you
niche.
know,
That's a niche.
there's the niche. There's the niche. Maybe this is my future. But I think it's interesting. A lot of the similar things that they're thinking and their concerns. And there's the precarity in the environment, and there's also their frustrations with organization as well too, that they felt almost being an organized person who had non-academic ambitions, if you will, was a disadvantage to have in those environments, in a sense. That you would become the person who gets things done, but not the person who benefits from
Mm.
things. So, there's a lot to think about there. But yes, there was an odd similarity with the stories that they've been coming up with.
Yeah, I think you should write a book on this topic.
Ah,
Uh, I think it would do well. Last thing,
uh,
I
a
have to do
tell-all.
a tell-all tale. Yeah, I think that would do well because I mean we can go through this thread and maybe we'll do a part two based on some of
Yeah,
the tech that you're working on, and maybe just touch on some of these other
yeah,
things. But generalist versus specialist. Okay,
yeah.
one of the biggest reasons why I recommend people, if you're just starting out and you have an offer from an AMC and you have an offer from mom and pop research center in your
Mm,
community, I think you take the mom and pop because you go in there, they don't have prestige, they don't have anything. You're going to be doing you're going to be
yeah,
generalist. AMC,
yep,
they're gonna say, "Hey, enter data in the EDC." Or if you do good
yeah,
at that, maybe you start doing like, you know, another level of entering data. Uh, so that there's this whole thing of how quickly you can build your career. I
mm,
think you're
mm,
in a way. I don't know if it's a waste of time because that sounds kind of harsh, but you're leaving a lot on the table. Let's just put it that
yeah.
way.
I think so. And the world changes and technology changes, and you might find yourself cut off at that point. So yeah, I I think there is great value at the beginning of your career in having this kind of period in which you're doing everything, or at least
Mm,
trying everything in there.
mm,
It makes you much more flexible. But yeah, I would not early on anyway. I would not overly constrain myself because you might stop enjoying that type of work. There, there might be a limited demand for that type of person in the world. Things could change, and although it can be frustrating early on to kind of think you've just got all the shallow knowledge of a lot of different things, I think you might disagree, Dan, but I think for junior people, I think I'd be more interested in people who had a bit more of a breadth of knowledge rather than they'd done one thing for 2 years.
absolutely. That's more of a marketable skill set, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Uh, Last thing, I think it's
Yeah.
obvious which one you prefer, but industry or academia, I mean, which which one you prefer now that you've done both?
I would never say that my time in university was wasted or anything like that. But, in terms of my personal satisfaction and, my work life balance and everything like that, industry far and away. I
Wow.
feel as if I'm making a real difference to people's lives, that I'm contributing to the world, I'm compensated well, and I have a much more relaxed life. And I do better work,
Hmm.
so there you go. The balance is way over on one side for me.
And both organizations, I mean, let's face it, they care about their own objectives first. But
There is that.
my theory is that at the private industry, their objectives are more aligned with them needing you to stay there. And so
Yes.
that can translate into them caring about you more. This is just
Mhm.
theory, but you've lived it on both sides. Am I onto something?
No, I think you may absolutely be onto something, and I've had friends and colleagues that we've discussed this with, and it's perplexing. You do not expect a large corporate entity to care about you, but it appears to. It makes sure that your concerns are taken care of, make sure that you're compensated well, and it appears to deal with you in a largely straight way. We're very direct, making sure that you can do your job properly. And yeah, I think sometimes in those other environments that just gets lost. There's no one really taking that top down view of the employees and saying, how do we keep them happy? How do we keep them from moving on? How do we make their job simple? It's just absent.
I'm sure even at the worst AMCs, there's certain departments that are run by rock stars that try their best in their own microenvironment to nurture their
Hmm,
employees. But we're speaking in general terms.
yeah.
This I'm just trying to deflect more hate, Paul. Like you're
Yeah.
the
Oh, look, I agree. I think kind of individuals inside the system will take care of you, but the system as a whole does not.
mm, wow. That's a tweet.
Yeah,
That's a
it is.
retweetable tweet. Wow, Paul. Okay, I think we ended on that note. I mean, maybe
Yeah,
not maybe, for sure. Let's do a part two more on the data science, the future of research, AI, and all the stuff that's coming next. Because if you want to talk
absolutely.
about people and the importance of people, people watching, listening are very afraid of that. So
Yep.
maybe we do something on that because you're in that world as well. Um, and we'll save the rest, guys. Paul's LinkedIn is underneath the video and in the show notes. Go check him out on LinkedIn. If you go to his LinkedIn profile, you'll see his Twitter post on his activity. So just click on that, and then you could read. It's like reading a book for free. I mean, basically, but we are now going to be hoping for a book, Paul. I think I don't know if there's ever been a book written on this.
I don't think there has been actually kind of like yeah. The
There you go.
biotech hell oil.
I think we found something for sure. There's definitely an audience for it. But thank you so much, Paul, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Everybody go connect with Paul, and can't wait to do the part two.
Pleasure, Dan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.